The chains weren't necessary. Mason had said that twice. The guards responded by adding a second pair. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't bruised. He wasn't broken. But the crowd roared like they'd already won, because to the Kordak Dominion, the fact that a human stood in their sacred arena at all meant he'd already lost. They were wrong. The gates behind him slammed shut with a mechanical groan. Ahead, the ground trembled. Footsteps like falling stone echoed through the Colosseum, each one louder than the last. Kravax, the Alpha, emerged through smoke and flame, armor plated in volcanic obsidian, jaw clenched in a smile that had ended a dozen worlds. He raised a clawed fist, and the crowd fell silent. Then, in perfect ritual cadence, the beast bellowed, "Kneel, human." Mason looked up at him, not defiant, not smug, just steady. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ceremonial chains shift against his wrists, then calmly bent one knee. The crowd surged in approval, until he pressed his hand into the dirt, locked eyes with the Alpha, and said evenly, "I only kneel to bury you." And just like that, the entire arena forgot how to breathe. 4 days earlier, Mason's feet hit the dry dust of Graltok Prime with diplomatic intentions and an emergency trauma kit. He wasn't military. Not anymore. His record was technically clean, except for one classified engagement that didn't officially happen. These days, he wore the blue trim of Terran Diplomatic Corps and kept his voice calm, his tone respectful, and his sidearm powered down. The Kordak Dominion had extended a formal invitation for ceasefire, negotiations, an unprecedented step for a species whose primary exports were conquest and colosseums. The Terran Confederation had sent Mason because he'd once convinced a hive mind to accept free elections and got away with it. The landing bay was all obsidian plating and ritual guards in bone armor. Mason stepped off the shuttle, hands visible, eyes level, and was immediately struck by the heat-dry, thin, and vibrating with distant crowd noise. A sunken arena loomed in the distance. He recognized it from the briefing materials. He was greeted by Governor Harel, a subordinate of Kravax. Her translator choker clicked to life. "You are honored. The Alpha allows you presence." "I appreciate that," Mason replied. "I hope we can find a peaceful resolution." "You will find resolution," Harel said. "Peace is optional." That had been the first red flag. The second came 2 hours later, in the form of an ambush disguised as a ceremonial tour. The hallway leading to the negotiation chamber had been oddly wide, and Mason's escort had thinned without explanation. When the doors ahead opened, it wasn't to a conference table, but to a drop chamber lined in grating and steam. Before Mason could backpedal, the floor gave way. He hit the metal below hard enough to jolt his spine. Training kicked in. Roll, assess, cover. But the stun blast hit him from above, brief, blunt, and efficient. He didn't lose consciousness, but he couldn't move either. Chains were clasped on, fast and deliberately theatrical. Harel loomed above him from a balcony. The Alpha believes a diplomat must prove the worth of his words. You will face him in the circle. Mason grit his teeth. This wasn't the deal. The Alpha makes the deal. The rest simply kneel. The holding pits beneath the arena stank of iron and resignation. Mason was dragged into a stone-walled chamber, already crowded with others. Most were Kordak or conquered species, many bearing old wounds and fresh ones alike. All were quiet. He was tossed into a corner, his chains clinking dully. A few prisoners eyed him with a mix of curiosity and pity. One of them, an emaciated Avarian with 4 arms and a split lip, whispered across the cell. "You Terrans are always last-minute guests. What'd you do?" "Apparently I asked for peace the wrong way." The Avarian gave a dry rasp that might have been a laugh. "They'll put you in the arena soon. They always do. Want advice?" Mason nodded once. "When they tell you to kneel, do it. Quick. Head bowed, knees down. Show submission. You might be kept as a bonded speaker instead of fertilizer." "What happens if you don't?" "Then you challenge the Alpha." The Avarian gestured with a bruised finger toward a slit in the wall that glowed with light and distant cheering. "No one wins against Kravax." "I don't intend to win," Mason said, eyes narrowing. "I intend to survive." "Then you're already dead." The next morning, they let him watch. 3 prisoners were dragged into the arena one by one. The first a Valkyrian with heavy scar setated before kneeling. Too slow. His head was gone before it touched the dirt. The second kneeled faster. Slavery. Chains. Dragged away. The third, young and defiant, refused. The Alpha snapped his spine in 3 places without a weapon. Mason didn't look away. He took mental notes. Kravax favored his right side when initiating a strike. His tail acted as a counterbalance. His footwork was fast but heavy, leaving deep imprints in the arena floor. His kill zone was close enough to feel his breath. He also noticed the pillars decorative, but hollow, the floor stitched with seams that could give under pressure, loose gravel near the eastern wall. A ceremonial chain, thrown aside from the last match, still coiled. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in the corner of his cell and practiced short breath holds and limb stretches, flexing each joint against the ceremonial chain to test slack and range. He asked the Avarian more questions: ritual codes, arena rules, what counted as a foul, what the crowd responded to. He was building a Planone fragment at a time. And then, just after the second sun rose over the spires, the guards came. The arena was bigger from inside, soaring stands lined with thousands of roaring Kordak, broad stone pillars carved with kill marks. The air smelled like blood baked into rock. Mason walked forward, shackled, feet bare, arms relaxed. He kept his pace even, his breath steady. He counted steps, gauged distances. Kravax entered like a collapsing mountain, 3 meters of rage in armor that seemed to burn rather than gleam. His gaze locked onto Mason instantly. He didn't roar, not yet. Instead, the Alpha raised both hands to the crowd and declared in booming ritual cadence, "A stranger seeks to challenge our law. A soft blood dares stand where warriors fell. Kneel, human." Mason let the moment hang, heavy with silence. Then he dropped to one knee. The crowd cheered. He pressed a hand to the dirt, locking eyes with Kravax. "I only kneel to bury you." The cheers twisted into gasps. Then the Alpha charged. Kravax moved like an avalanche given form, armor crashing with each step, claws tearing furrows through the arena floor. The Alpha roared not for intimidation, but declaration. This was domination manifest, 3 meters of muscle bred for war, bolstered by a culture that had worshipped violence long before they discovered electricity. His charge wasn't reckless, it was practiced. Mason didn't move, not yet. He watched the Alphas approach like a physicist tracking vectors. Each footfall told him more Kravax's gait, his rotation, where his mass would carry if interrupted mid-stride. The Alpha's right claw lifted for a downward strike. Mason shifted just before impact. The claw tore through air. Kravax's weight carried him past. Mason rolled sideways across gravel, chains rattling, body low, redirecting momentum rather than resisting it. The Alpha spun around, snorting. The crowd booed. They wanted blood, not footwork. Kravax growled, amused. "You run, little diplomat?" Mason didn't answer. He moved. Fast, calculated, his eyes already scanning the nearest structure, a crumbling pillar with 3 visible cracks. He ran toward it, knowing the Alpha would chase, knowing the crowd would hate it. They needed to, that was the point. Behind him, Kravax stomped forward again. This time, Mason slowed just a fraction enough to let the Alpha close the gap. He passed the broken pillar and, at the last moment, turned sharply. The Alpha didn't. His massive frame collided with the column. It held, barely. Mason kept moving, breathing hard now, not from fear, but effort. His legs ached from the sudden sprint. His feet, already bruised from stone and chain, protested each impact. The chain cut into his wrists with each swing, but none of that mattered. He had 10 minutes, maybe less. Kravax charged again. This time, Mason ducked. The Alpha's claw scraped the arena wall where his head had been. Mason dropped to one knee, pivoted on his heel, and kicked off toward the loose gravel pile he'd noted earlier. As he ran, he yanked hard at the chain on his left wrist. It loosened slight enough to pull one end forward like a rope. Kravax followed, snorting steam. "You hide behind pebbles and chains. You die with no honor." "No," Mason muttered. "I live with it." He reached the gravel, spun, and kicked up a cloud of dust into the Alpha's face. Not enough to blind, but enough to blur. Kravax's next swipe missed again, close enough that Mason felt wind shear across his cheek. He used the moment to wrap the chain once around his forearm, creating tension. Then he backed away, drawing the Alpha toward the middle. "You think you can bleed me?" Kravax bellowed. "You think cunning makes you strong?" "I think you're used to applause more than pain," Mason called back. and I think you're too loud to listen." Kravax charged again, faster now, angrier. His tail whipped side to side, lashing gouges into the dirt. Mason stepped toward the broken ceremonial chain from the previous match, coiled near the center. He stooped mid-stride, grabbed it, and looped it around his already bound wrists. The effect was cosmetic a show, but it also doubled the slack. The Alpha reached him a heartbeat later. Mason didn't dodge. He fell. Not from impact, but intention. He collapsed forward just as Kravax's claw came down, slipping beneath the blow, rolling beneath the Alpha's outstretched legs. As he did, he whipped both chains upward, tangling them behind the Alpha's knees. The loop snapped tight. Kravax stumbled. It wasn't a full fall. The beast twisted, recovered, roared in surprise. Mason was already moving again, dragging the chains tight across the Alpha's calves and diving toward the eastern wall. Kravax tried to pursue and his legs locked. The crowd shrieked in surprise. It wouldn't last long. The Alpha reached down, yanked the chain, snapped a link, but Mason didn't need long. He reached the base of the same cracked pillar Kravax had slammed earlier. He turned, waited. Kravax charged one final time. This time, Mason didn't dodge until the last moment, sidestepping just enough that Kravax's shoulder clipped the pillar squarely. The third impact was too much. With a sickening groan of stressed stone, the column cracked and gave way. The top section fell directly onto Kravax's back, forcing him down to one knee. Not crushed, not defeated, but off balance, off rhythm. Mason was there before he could rise. He looped both sets of chains around the Alpha's neck knot, strangling but bracing. Then he braced his legs on the back of Kravax's armor and pulled. It wasn't about strength. It was leverage. Kravax rose with Mason clinging to him. The crowd screamed. The Alpha thrashed, but each motion tightened the chain across his own throat. Mason didn't try to choke him. He couldn't, but he could hold. 1 second. 2. 3. Kravax stumbled, then collapsed forward, face slamming into the dirt with a grunt. The arena went silent. Mason didn't move. His arms trembled, his ribs ached, his right shoulder throbbed from the jolt. But he kept his grip locked until the Alpha's growling turned to stillness. And then only then he let go. Kravax lay face down, not dead, breathing, dazed, armor cracked. Mason stood, slowly. His chest rose and fell in sharp, exhausted bursts. The ceremonial chain slipped from his wrists into the dirt. He didn't say a word. He didn't raise his arms. He just stood. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Then, the law triggered. The great horn above the arena blared deep, guttural, final. Victory without kneeling. Challenge answered. Position claimed. Kravax the Alpha had fallen. By ancient right, Mason was now the new Alpha. He didn't speak for a full minute. The crowd was dead silent, not in mourning, just stunned. None of them had ever seen a non-Kordak win a ritual challenge, and certainly not a soft-skinned, wiry-limbed human who hadn't even drawn blood. Finally, Mason looked down at Kravax. The Alpha groaned, shifting slightly. His ribs likely bruised, maybe fractured, but he'd live. Mason stepped forward and held out a hand. The crowd gasped again. Kravax stared at the offered hand, nostrils flaring. "You yield," Mason said quietly, "and I let you live." "You mock me." "No," Mason said. "I lead now. You can follow, or you can crawl." Kravax hesitated. Then, with painful effort, he reached up and accepted the grip. Mason helped him to his feet. It was clumsy. The Alpha weighed nearly 4 times as much. His legs trembled, but he stood. When he did, he turned to the crowd and without bowing stepped back and lowered his arms. The signal was clear. Submission, not disgrace. Mason turned to face the audience, every eye fixed on him. "From this day forward," he said, voice hoarse but steady, "no one kneels by force." The statement echoed across the arena, then through the broadcast feeds. Billions heard it, millions watched, in real time. And from the stands, someone began to cheer. Then another. Then 100 more. Not because they were ordered, not because it was tradition. Because, for the first time, they understood a new kind of strength. The corridors beneath the arena were built for giants, not men. Mason's footsteps echoed through the obsidian passageways as he followed the 2 ceremonial guards, assigned to him-hulking Kordak warriors, clad in the burnt gold armor of Alpha protectors. Neither had spoken since the match ended. They didn't look at him, didn't threaten him, just walked ahead in silence, their spear halberds held at ceremonial tilt. He was limping slightly. The soreness had crept in the moment adrenaline wore off. His left shoulder was bruised from the chain tension, ribs throbbing from where Kravax's tail had clipped him mid-roll. Nothing Crack T was sure of that, but the bruises were blooming purple by the time the med officer checked him backstage. No internal bleeding. The Dominion medic grunted, scanning him with a crude but functional handheld device. Tissue trauma in the intercostals, subcutaneous hematoma forming, minor left shoulder strain. You'll need compression wraps, analgesics, and 2 rotations of reduced exertion. Translation: rest, painkillers, and no showboating. He'd taken the wraps and left the painkillers. He needed his head clear. The guards led him through towering bronze doors into the Alpha's spire. It wasn't a throne room. It was a war hall. Weapons lined the walls, some ceremonial, others still crusted in blood. There were trophies, old banners, cracked helmets from long-defeated challengers. At the far end stood a raised obsidian dais, with a platform inlaid with heat-reactive metals designed to pulse red when an Alpha approached. It lit up beneath Mason's feet. He stared at it, expression unreadable. Governor Hale was waiting there, her tall frame still wrapped in formal bone cloth. The translator at her throat flickered softly. "You will be addressed as Alpha now," she said coolly. "By ancient law, the challenge is concluded. You are leader of the Dominion." "No," Mason said. "I beat your Alpha. I didn't sign up to become him." Hrel raised a brow ridge. "The law doesn't distinguish between volunteers and victors. You refused to kneel. Now they must rise. I came here to talk peace. You just redefined it." He rubbed the back of his neck. The wraps under his tunic were tight, reducing movement in his ribs, but it was a manageable discomfort. What wasn't manageable was the weight of 10 billion eyes now waiting for his next move. He should have been preparing a message to send back to the Terran Confederation, explaining everything, reassuring them, requesting extraction. But the Kordak made it very clear. Stepping down without a successor meant complete civil collapse. Every war clan would challenge the power vacuum. Blood would coat the stars. So instead, Mason was shown to his new quarters. They weren't luxurious. They were functional, steel-lined, defense-hardened, and equipped with a tactical holotable for issuing orders to fleets he didn't want. A medical kit sat on a side table. Mason sat on the bed, unwrapped his left shoulder, and reapplied the pressure bandage slowly. His left deltoid was swelling up. The pain was dull but persistent. Range of motion was limited. He took that time to think. He couldn't fake leadership for long. The Kordak weren't just brutes. They were observant, brutally hierarchical, and fanatically loyal to strength, not showmanship. If they sensed hesitation, they'd pounce. But they also believed in ritual, in law. That was leverage. He tapped the comm terminal and opened a broadcast channel. "Begin interfleet transmission. Alpha Command override." A chime acknowledged the link. He stood in front of the projector, one arm held tight against his ribs, and began to speak. "To the clans of the Dominion, I do not come to claim your history. I will not erase your traditions, but I will change what must be changed." He paused. "Strength is not domination, it's restraint. A leader is not the last one standing. A leader ensures others can stand." He leaned forward slightly. "So, hear me now. Forced kneeling is over. Slavery through combat is over. You fight by choice. You rise by merit. You fall only if you break your word." He finished with the only thing the Kordak would respect. "And if you disagree," he said coldly, "you can challenge me, like Kravax did. But bring a plan, not just muscle." Then he ended the feed. Later that day, Kravax requested an audience. His injuries had been assessed in a field medic ward near the barracks. Dislocated shoulder, 2 fractured ribs, no internal bleeding. He'd been fitted with a support brace across his torso and an immobilizer over his upper right arm. Mason met him in the observation deck overlooking the Colosseum. The Alpha-turned advisor stood stiffly, breathing slower than usual. "You should have killed me," Kravax said. "You should have aimed left instead of center." The former Alpha gave a grunt that might have been amusement. "You have made enemies." "I always do." Kravax stared at him. "They will test you. Let them. You don't fight like us. Then maybe that's the point. They stood there in silence for a moment. Below them, the arena sands were being raked clean, fresh lines drawn for the next ritual. Mason's eyes lingered on the far corner where the broken pillar still lay in chunks, a quiet reminder that nothing, not even stone, was immune to pressure. You could help, Mason said suddenly. I lost, Kravax said simply. Which means you know how they think. You know the other alphas, the minor warlords, the hungry ones. I don't need soldiers. I need insight. Give me that. Kravax studied him. You want to change the Dominion. I want it to survive long enough to matter. After a pause, Kravax gave a shallow nod. Then I serve. 3 days later, the first test came. A Warfleet chieftain named Gorvek issued a formal challenge. He refused the ban on forced kneeling. He declared Mason a fraud. His war clan arrived in low orbit with 2 destroyers and an open transmission. Mason didn't wait for negotiation. He called for a tribunal assembly, an ancient but rarely used clause that allowed the Alpha to demand a public reckoning in front of all major commanders. Gorvek arrived armed, snarling, confident. Mason arrived with a sling on his left arm and a datapad in his right. I won't fight you, Mason said, but I will bury you with facts. Gorvek blinked. Mason activated the holo screen. It displayed casualty logs from Gorvek's last 6 campaigns, undisclosed civilian losses, resource burn rates, supply line inefficiencies. Mason had spent the last 30 hours poring over Dominion data with 2 neutral analysts and Kravax himself. The warlord sputtered, furious. You dare slander me with numbers? No, Mason said. I just showed everyone that your conquests cost more than they earn. You don't lead warriors, you waste them. The tribunal roared. Gorvek withdrew his challenge in shame. That night, Mason finally collapsed onto his bunk and let himself feel the full weight of the last few days. His shoulder ached worse than ever. He finally took a low-dose analgesic. The bruising across his ribs had begun to yellow, but the soreness still made it hard to sleep. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Earth, about the mission that went so far off the rails it somehow looped into success. There were still a dozen fires to put out. The Dominion's economy was based on conquest. Entire shipyards ran on forced labor. Cultural doctrines celebrated duels over dialogue. But something had shifted. He'd made them look up. And now, for the first time, they were thinking about standing together. Mason didn't expect applause when he walked into the High Conclave. He didn't get any. The vast chamber, once used for executions and strategic decrees, was now a war hall without war. The stone floors had been scrubbed of old blood. The relics of past victories still loomed on the walls, massive blades and burnt flags from fallen systems, but there was something new now. Silence. Uncertain, heavy silence. Every seat was filled. Clan leaders, fleet admirals, matriarchs of the old bloodlines. Some wore armor, others diplomatic robes, but all bore the mark of Kordak tradition-etched bone pendants displaying the victories of their ancestors. Mason wore none. He still had the sling. His left arm was healing slower than he liked. The sprained shoulder had swollen again after the tribunal with Gorvek, and the pain had spiked during sleep. The Dominion's medics had wanted to administer a steroid injection, but he'd refused anything that might fog his judgment. He was still taking basic anti-inflammatories and keeping movement minimal, which meant dressing himself was a one-handed ordeal most mornings. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to look impressive. He was here to end it. Kravax stood at his side, as always. No longer alpha, but advisor, bodyguard, and though neither would say it aloud, something almost like a friend. You sure they'll listen? Mason asked under his breath. No, Kravax said, but they will watch. Mason stepped forward. The center of the chamber held a single platform with a shallow bowl of flame, the signal pyre. Traditionally used to announce the start of wars or executions, it now lit the space with flickering gold. Mason stopped just short of it, faced the crowd, and waited until the whispers died down. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He just spoke, calmly and clearly. I've been Alpha for 12 days. In that time, 3 fleets have challenged me, 7 clans have declared autonomy, and at least 2 assassins have made attempts on my life. I've eaten nothing but spicy fungus paste for a week, and I can't lift my left arm higher than my chest. A few chuckles, low and surprised. Good. They were still listening. He continued. When I arrived, I came as a diplomat. When I was captured, I expected to die. When I stood in the arena, I saw what you believe strength means." He pointed not dramatically, but deliberately at the signal pyre. "This flame has been used for centuries to announce violence. You gather here to see who will fall next, but no one here is falling, not today, because this fire will mark something else." He pulled a small device from his belt and activated a projection. The hollow screen expanded above the pyre, showing footage grainy, raw, unedited. A Kordak youth helping a wounded prisoner to his feet after a sparring match. A Dominion engineer using human gravity calculations to retrofit a crippled ship. A Terran surgeon training a Kordak trauma unit on battlefield triage techniques. Not wars, not victories. Cooperation. "I am not here to rule you," Mason said. "I am here because your law put me here, and by that same law, I can change that law." The crowd stiffened. One admiral stood. "You mean to abolish the right?" Mason nodded. "Yes, not all of it. The challenge remains. The voice of strength still matters, but it must evolve. We cannot pretend the stars are still wild. The galaxy watches us now, not with fear but confusion." He took a breath. And then he said it. "I resign the Alpha's mantle." The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, a few even reached for weapons. Kravax didn't move, neither did Mason. He raised his right hand slowly and waited for the room to settle. "I do not leave you leaderless. I invoke the right of assembly. From this day forward, the Alpha is not one but many. The Alpha Council will rule together. You will vote, debate, and decide. If challenged, you stand as one. If war must be waged, it is declared by reason, not ritual." One of the matriarchs stood, frowning. "And who speaks for the humans?" "I did," Mason said. "Now I go back to doing what I was sent to do: diplomacy. You want someone to talk peace with the rest of the galaxy? I'm your man. But if you want someone to throw challengers into the sand, you'll have to find another hobby." A few stared at him, stunned. Others surprisingly nodded. The room didn't erupt in cheers, but no one drew a blade. That was enough. A week later, Mason boarded the Confederation shuttle with a bag over one shoulder and two cracked ribs still taped beneath his shirt. His shoulder was healing, slowly. He'd begun physical therapy with Dominion Med staff, 3 days, a goal-limited range of motion exercises, isometric loading. The pain remained, especially in the morning, but he could finally lift his arm above his chest again. The doctor estimated full mobility in another 3 to 4 weeks. No combat, no stress. Which meant going home was the healthiest thing he could do. Kravax met him at the docking bay. "You'll never be forgotten," the former Alpha said quietly. "I'm counting on that." Kravax handed him something small, a chunk of obsidian carved into the shape of a kneeling figure, buried halfway into stone. "What's this?" "A reminder. You never had to kneel, but you made all of us stand taller." Mason turned the carving over in his hand. "Take care of them, Kravax." "I already am." That night, across Dominion space, the hollow feeds played an edited version of Mason's final speech, subtitles in a dozen languages, a clip of Kravax bowing, slight nod in submission, but respect. A still frame of the signal pyre, burning beneath the new Alpha Council's crest. The story spread faster than any war ever had. The man who refused to kneel, and ruled by standing up. On Earth, children reenacted the arena scene on playgrounds with sticks and chairs. On Kordak colony worlds, young warriors debated strategy instead of swordcraft. One planet painted Mason's quote across their training hall: "I only kneel to bury you." And far from the noise, aboard a slow cruiser bound for Terran space, Mason sat alone in his cabin, shoulder gently throbbing, ribs still sore, but no longer bleeding. He stared out the viewport, not smiling, just breathing. Mission accomplished.